In this episode we'll be looking at shooting in woodlands. It's something a lot of people find quite tricky. I'll hopefully pass on a few little tips that will help make that a bit easier. Ideally we'll be heading out and we'll get some kind of misty, mysterious, sort of wintry mood to the shots, but very conditions dependent, so we'll try and make the most of whatever we get there. This shot was taken on a cold wintry morning when some mist was hanging in the woods. A big part of shooting an image like this is reading the weather, basically. You get used to your locations, and I know that this particular patch of woodland is great on a cold morning. There's a good chance it'll be misty there. If it's going to be misty anywhere, it'll be misty in certain areas of this woodland. It's good to look for somewhere that's next to some open grassland on the edges of the woods. If you get deep inside, then it's unlikely the mist will penetrate. But mist is great for adding some separation, and you'll see that kind of the image would be quite messy without that kind of hazy element to the background, which just adds some depth to the image and is great for simplifying what's quite a chaotic scene. Okay, so we're going to head out now, and hopefully we'll get some good conditions for shooting in woodland, and we'll see what we can do. As you can see, this is a beech woodland, which is usually very nice in mist or atmospheric conditions. We've got a slightly drab morning this morning, but it still works really well, especially in winter actually, because the trees, when they're wet, take on a kind of very dark black appearance on the trunks when they're wet. The setup I'm using, I've got a Canon 70-200 f2.8 Mark II lens on, which is really good for compressing the perspective. So when you're in a woodland, one of the main problems you face is that it can be quite chaotic. So one of the main aims is to try and get some order into that chaos, and you can do that a few ways. Mist is a really good way because it helps separation between the trees. Obviously that relies on the conditions. So without something like mist, another option you can use is to use your depth of field to separate the trees. So when I'm in woodland, I tend to very rarely go above f8, often shooting at f2.8 and as low as that, because that creates the feeling of depth in the image by getting a nice sharp foreground and a little bit of blur going into the background, which helps just create that separation and stops it being a too chaotic image. What I often do is look for kind of little cameos within the woodland, because it can be quite daunting shooting in woodland because there's so much going on, and it's very atmospheric when you're here, but trying to make sense of that into an image isn't necessarily the easiest situation to be in. So what I often look for is just little kind of snippets of the woodland, which kind of give the feeling that you get when you're here, and sort of try and put a little bit of order into that chaos again, as I said. But at the moment I'm just using a focal length of around 70. And I'm on f2.8, and that's just given me that front to background separation. So I'm focused on a near tree, and then as it drops off, it all gets much softer, so you get that feeling of depth, and it helps get rid of that chaotic feel. It's about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I often shoot at sunrise because the light is softer and you get nice kind of side light, which helps, especially in woodlands, to get the definition on the trunks. When you get light coming on one side, then it adds a bit of modelling to the trunks, and just gives you that sense of depth. If you shoot later in the day, which can work really well, especially in summer, you get the light coming through the canopy. But when it's winter, such as now, and there's not many leaves on the trees, then a nice side light just adds a bit of definition. So what I generally do is wander around in the woodland, just looking for either patches of light, which can add sort of a nice bit of interest to an image, or an interesting tree, a patch of leaves on amongst some bare trees, which is quite nice because it just adds that little focal point. Again, it's all about kind of trying to simplify the image and simplify the woodland, really. So I'm in the woodland again, slightly different woodland to the earlier one, which is we're in the beech before, and now we're in amongst. We've got some of the evergreen pines to the side of us, and then some nice young birch to this side. Slightly different to shoot in a more open woodland as we were before, because it's a lot more chaotic and it's a lot busier, which presents different challenges. It can be a case of trying to again simplify the chaos into a more simple image that's not as hard for the viewer to look at with so much going on. And when you've got somewhere like this where it's lots of young saplings and it's all lots of branches, it can be quite nice to look for pattern rather than individual trees or trunks. So looking for an image as a whole, looking for shapes of the foliage or branches and colours. I generally use live view when I'm shooting, and manually focusing, that's great because I can zoom in to 10 times and then focus really accurately. I can choose exactly where I want to have my focus point. That's very important when you're shooting at wider apertures, like I'm on f2.8 at the moment, so that means I can pinpoint the exact area I want to focus on. I've got a Lee filter holder on the front with a polarizer on at the moment. I use the Lee system on all my lenses. I have a wide angle adapter ring on all my lenses so that I can quickly take off the filter holder. Whenever I change lenses, it just means I can change lenses quickly without having to screw on filter rings. And on the front I've got the landscape polarizer. It's something that a lot of people think that polarizers are for making a blue sky bluer, which they can do, but actually they're really useful in somewhere like woodland, because when you've got reflections of water on the branches, or you've got wet trunks and wet branches, if a spin of the polarizer can cut out those reflections and gets rid of some glare and adds a richness to your images, which is really useful. And obviously if you've got the polarizer on, you can choose whether you have those reflections or not, so you've got the option. And it can be really useful in a situation like this to cut out that glare, because you'll find that you get a bit more depth and your blacks are a bit blacker and your colours are a bit more saturated. One of the key things I think when photographing woodland, which I always look for, is I try to exclude the sky. A lot of people, it's easy to do when you're shooting in woodland, you try to include the sky as you would do in a landscape scene, but often you've got a huge difference in dynamic range between the bright sky and the dark woodlands. So you'll find that the sky is often very burnt out, doesn't really have much detail in it, and if you try to cope with that using filters, it's often quite hard because the canopy isn't a hard grad line or a soft grad line, so cutting out the sky pulls you into the forest almost. So having an image which is just full of trees or foliage, it kind of makes you feel a little bit more as though you're in the forest rather than getting the sky in when you get the wider scene. And it's kind of, again, part of simplifying the image and taking as many elements out of it as you can to concentrate on one small area. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to have a look at the WEX blog, where there are more tips and techniques on landscape photography.